Okay, I am very excited to welcome the authors of the book Choose Your Place, Rethinking Your Home as You Age, Leslie Eckford and Amanda Lambert. Thanks, you two, for joining us today, and really excited to dive into your book and get the audience asking some questions and participating. But before we do that, let's get to know the two of you a little bit better. Leslie, you're on my right, at least on the screen here. So let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to writing this book.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Leslie Eckford, and I am a mostly retired nurse and LCSW. I still do a little therapy, but I have always been drawn to aging populations and have worked in home care and geriatric psychiatry. And Amanda and I met at a really fantastic outpatient program, community mental health for people 55 and older. So this is an area that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm also a long distance caregiver for my mother, who is in her 90s and has dementia. And so I have a lot to relate to with that experience as well.
I love it. And Amanda, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, hi, everybody, and thanks for having us, Steve. We just love to talk about aging. And Leslie and I have known each other a long time. I'm a geriatric care manager and consultant and a freelance writer. And, this book, I think, is near and dear to both of us because we're hoping to figure this out for ourselves as we go along. So, yeah, really excited to talk about this topic because there's a lot to say.
Yeah, and one thing that these two you have teamed up, and this is your third book, correct? So
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong, but the first one was the first one, Beating the Senior Blues: How to Feel Better and Enjoy Life Again.
Yes.
Yes.
And then the second one is Aging with Care: Your Guide to Hiring and Managing Caregivers at Home. And that is a topic that I know a lot of our community members are dealing with. So this is just, we're definitely going to have you come back and we're going to focus on that book next time. So I'll make sure to get you on the calendar. But we're going to talk today. And we can go off script, of course, but what I want to do is give our audience a glimpse of your book and use your book as a way for us to discuss this important topic of where and how to live. And so the book is Choose Your Place, Rethinking Your Home as You Age. And this method has really worked well lately with book authors. We're just going to walk through each chapter in the book, and you all can just riff on different thoughts and ideas, and then I will keep tabs on the Q&A and the chat. And if audience, feel free to jump in if you have things to offer, if you have questions on these topics. But let's start with chapter one, which is Necessity is the Mother of Invention.
So we had just finished writing Aging with Care about all the issues that caregivers and their families um, have to deal with. And we really wanted to do something more fun. And we are always intrigued with where people are living as they age. And so we just started chatting. And the next thing you know, we're thinking about chapters. And we realized this is a book that we want to expand our audience to include people who have not retired yet. We really met a lot of people who are already aging who kind of got themselves stuck in a certain place that they didn't want to be living in as they were aging. Our parents' generation, for example, was mostly herded toward assisted living, was a new concept for them. but mostly the nursing homes. So we really wanted to see what people were doing out there. And we discovered, of course, people, especially baby boomers and younger, are really rethinking this and coming up with some great ideas. So that's sort of how we got here. And the necessity as the mother of invention really speaks to people need to find different things. Everyone is a little bit different, their situation, their finances, their family. And that's where we start in this book.
That's great. Yeah, as you had sort of said, is that and actually I know looking at the chapters, a lot of what we're going to talk about here is different places you could move to or how you could make a move. But I know that your chapter, your last book, focused on home care and providing home care in home. Uh, Before we dive into the chapter 2 on co-housing, any words of wisdom on, how do you evaluate if, or how do you figure out, can I age in place or should I age in place? Any thoughts on that?
How much time do you have, Steve? It's aging in place is what most people say they want to do, which is feasible and reasonable if you have the funds and the ability to be able to support your care at home. Many people do it and they do it successfully. I think it's just a matter of, and as we get towards the end of the book, it's a matter of being able to envision what will your aging look like, and if you end up needing more care, can you stay at home financially, for one thing? So I think having all these other options allows people to think, okay, maybe there are some other housing possibilities where I don't have to stay at home, but I don't have to consider assisted living if I'm not ready or if that's something that I don't want. In all of these options, if you end up needing more care, you will probably have to figure that out. That's just a fact. And that's kind of the constraining factor, I would say, with all of these choices, whether it's co-housing or shared housing or, the family tradition, any of these, if you end up needing care, how will you pay for that?
Yep. And Pam Ostrowski has some great comments, and we need adult children to understand the questions to ask. We need to define what home is and what aging in place is. And actually, we talked about this on last week on one of our discussions, and I'm sort of kicking myself for throwing out that term aging in place. The one thing that we've learned is aging in place, there's no one definition of it. In fact, it's so if you look it up, it means, hey, moving to an assisted living and staying there, that's aging in place, right? Here's the way that I define aging in place, and everybody, there is no definition now, but I call sort of aging in place, it's like wherever you are now, if figuring out how you could stay there. It might not have been your lifelong home. Maybe you moved to a condo and now aging in place is like, or maybe you moved to an active adult community, okay? And Margaritaville, we were talking about Margaritaville, but now you've got healthcare issues. Those cannot be addressed by the services at Margaritaville. So you are to age in place, you may need to bring in home care to your home in Margaritaville. And then I like to also bring up the aging in community. What I refer to when I say that is, okay, I can't stay in this home, but I like this neighborhood. So how can I figure out to stay close? So thanks, Pam, for throwing that out. Okay.
And I would add also, I appreciate that question too, because a good starting point with this book, and also what we do think about in our previous book about aging with care, and Pam brought up dementia also, is like throwing a wrench in the work, because what would work for one person who does not have dementia to stay in a present home, and I like how you say that, just where are you presently, and can you take a really sober look at what exists and what doesn't exist there that you might need for health issues. Dementia is a very unique health issue, and we find that people who have dementia have all sorts of different levels of dementia, which is why I have a problem with the dementia care unit. I've seen people who have very early stages of dementia be thrown in with people who are very advanced, and psychologically and emotionally, that's just like being in a prison.
Yep.
So for that person who has an early stage, it's not good in my view.
Yeah,
So,
I would
and
agree.
we're seeing so much innovation in this area in terms of so many providers now. The innovative providers are being very thoughtful in their design and tr- trying to do the early stage group, early stage and late stage, and the day programs. They're crazy. There's so much out there. Okay, let's we can jump back into the healthcare stuff. Let's get into the fun stuff, because this really is, I love this list here, because it makes you sort of think, and none of this stuff happens like that. You've got to think, talk, and plan about it. But I love number 2, because I'm a huge fan of this, and I'm not sure if many people in the audience know about what co-housing is. The chapter 2 is the allure of co-housing.
Yeah, co-housing is a great concept that was developed in Denmark originally, and it's kind of taken off in the US, but it's constrained by real estate. So most co-housing requires pretty large pieces of land, and so many co-housing developments are in more sort of rural, quasi-rural areas, because there's a series of homes that are grouped together and everybody works together as a community, and there's usually a common area for meals. Everybody shares in decision making, which can be good or bad, and they share in meals and in chores, in the whole financial aspect of co-housing. So co-housing can be really great. There are some urban co-housing developments, which I think we were kind of talking a little bit about that, Steve, about how that might have more appeal for some people, especially for developers, because it's really expensive to buy land, especially near urban areas. There's just not that much land available. But co-housing, some are intergenerational and some aren't. Some are just for older people and some allow younger people. So there's a very sort of fluid, flexible approach to co-housing.
and I think it's important to delineate and distinguish co-housing, and excuse my attitude here a little bit, but I grew up with some people who lived on communes, and this is not a commune. This is far from a commune. It's also not like a kibbutz. It's not a place that perhaps has an enterprise that's involved with its existence, like a farm or something producing a product. Or it's also not about sharing duties for raising children. There might be children living in co-housing, and there might be some group activities, but it's not about that responsibility. So I do want to make sure people know about that. And then most of the co-housers that we spoke to interviewing for this book talked about the dynamic governance. And that is a really key piece, I think, for people who are considering co-housing, to realize that there is a structure and a format for problem solving and communication that is required of each co-housing member.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, You know, I'm a huge fan of this, and I had attended. I dropped in to chat everybody the Co-housing Association
Mhm.
website where you can do a search and find all
Yes.
of the different communities. And I recommend that everybody just go drive through one of these communities and just, you know, roll down the window and chat to somebody. You'll be blown away. It's One of the things I remember doing a panel back when we did live events of co-housing residents, and they were talking about their experience, and somebody said, "Well, what do you do when you don't get along with your neighbor?" And the I remember the panel member, she laughed and she said, um, actually we solved the problem, and she goes, I bet you anything our solutions are better than your solutions when you don't get along with your neighbor, because we have a structure for working together, and everybody who moves into a co-housing community is there to help each other. Let's see, Deborah Doherty says, any examples of co-housing within an apartment building in an urban area? You know,
Mhm.
it's funny you brought that up, Deborah, because one of the co-housing comes in all shapes and sizes, but one of the challenges is, like developing any real estate, is that it's expensive and it's challenging, and then you've got this unique aspect to this. But I believe there may be some creative solutions that are out there, but one of the things that I often tell people is that wouldn't it be great if you could somehow embrace the co-housing principles in your own neighborhood? And I think one of the closest things to this that we see out there are the villages, that's trying to accomplish some of these things. Jeannie Bear says, there's a co-housing in Portland, Oregon called PDX Commons, and I think that you all probably discovered there are some senior specific co-housing communities that are
Mhm.
in that are out there. And while I like that idea, I actually sort of feel like a co-housing community with all ages enables the community to support the older adults and vice versa a little bit
Mhm.
better.
Yeah, we live in Salt Lake City, and a couple of years ago, there was a woman who was very interested in developing. There is co-housing here. There's one development, but it's intergenerational, and she wanted a one just for older people, but she could never find affordable land, you know, that was close enough to an urban area, because you know you have to consider medical care. And she could just never find affordable land to be able to develop it. So I kind of like the idea of the urban co-housing, you know, using the same philosophy, but having it located in a central area.
Well, you could also see, and again, I'm brainstorming here, folks, is that what if there was a new apartment building that was going up and a developer could sort of say, could I take these two floors or something like that, you know, so that it's sort of contained within a larger community. I mean, I, it, you know, we can get creative here in the future.
Well, and that's happening.
Mhm.
There's an organization called Upside Home,
Mhm.
and what he's doing is purchasing apartment buildings and turning them into senior living. I don't know that they have the same philosophy of like decision making and that co-housing has, but it's such a great idea. I mean, why not? And then, you know, Leslie and I have talked about, oh, I forget, was it in Los Angeles, Leslie, where there was this sort of affordable housing apartment building that was built basically for millennials, you know, but who ends up moving there? Seniors, you know,
Mhm.
because they wanted the amenities, they liked, you know, the single floor living, they liked having access to culture, to restaurants, to medical care. So that's the kind of flexibility I think that you're talking about, Steve.
I love it.
And I am seeing a lot in the comments that people are aware of some of these developments, and I'm really excited because we have seen, I'm blocking on the name of it, but there was an architectural firm and public housing experts who did a study where they want to transform or remodel certain existing buildings for this very thing. But the real thing that is not, I'm not really certain, and we'll talk more about those other developments, is this dynamic governance, because it's not like a condo association. It's very different.
Mhm.
which doesn't work out for a lot of people.
Right.
So those condominium associations, my dad
Right.
belonged to
We'll
one.
talk
and it
about
was
those
just,
too.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yeah.
And I did just find the study that I'm dropping in, the effects of co-housing models on people's health and well-being. So, well, let's keep on moving. We can always come back. Let's talk about another thing that I'm super passionate about: the Golden Girls inspired house. Uh,
Yes. We obviously, those of us who grew up with that television show, have always been intrigued. And but it's a real model that is working not just in the US, but around the world. So it's also about a certain level of cooperation, but it's in a smaller format, and there is taking into account personalities and what people can bring to the group that's living together.
And now there are some companies that will match you to your shared home situation. Those are kind of constrained to East Coast, West Coast, but it's kind of like online dating, but to find your shared household, which is kind of nice in a way because they vet people. You're able to actually establish what would work for you and what wouldn't. Everybody else, I think, is kind of on their own. And some people are getting together and purchasing a home, like friends will get together and purchase a home and decide to share the home together.
yeah.
And we mentioned Silver Nest in the book as well. And some of these companies are growing in fits and starts. And another thing that we added to our chapter in this book is we interviewed a college counselor who deals with housing issues of college students, because a lot of us may not have had a roommate or a housemate in many decades. And so we added this to give a perspective of what are people dealing with as issues, as roommates, as young people, and does that apply, or do I remember having some of these same issues? And it's kind of a fun way to think about, okay, how, Amanda and I have dealt with people who are like, absolutely not. I am an individual. I will only live in my space. I will not share space with anyone non-related. But it's really got a lot of pluses. In terms of, we all have heard before the pandemic, isolation and loneliness is a bad idea if you are aging. How are you going to deal with that? Maybe you don't even have to leave your home. Maybe it's going to be people that you are living with.
And again, some amazing resources in chat. Again, to the audience, thank you so much. Glenna's got a DC Philly corridor website called Birdwatch. I'm not familiar with that one. That's good. I'm going to check that out. Jeannie Bear, Sharing Housing. I dropped in Montgomery County, Maryland, some resources there. Great. And, one of the things that when we were chatting about having you on, I always say to the folks that I have on, okay, what's your call to action here at the end? Do you guys have like a consulting gig, or are you working for one of these companies? And the great thing about Leslie and Amanda, they just wrote this book. They wrote this book to help themselves and help others. So their only call to action is buy the book if you're interested, and you can do that. They're not on retainer from any co-housing company or with Silver Nest or anything like that. Okay, chapter 4, the family tradition, moving in with the kids, and one thing that I will say, and I put a big asterisk on this, is that Solo aging is the hottest topic of discussion that we have on here. So, uh, when we talk about a chapter like this, I remind people that just because you have kids doesn't mean you're connected to them or you're moving in. And just because you don't have kids or a family doesn't mean that there's not people out there that care about you. Okay, so talk about moving in with the kids.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, Steve, because some people don't have kids. So, and so moving in with the kids and the kids moving in with you, it goes both ways. And of course, other cultures, this is just what people do, and they've done it for generations. I think, it's sort of a flexible situation. I know at the beginning of the pandemic, when a lot of the assisted livings and nursing homes shut down visitors, families were literally taking their parents and grandparents out of these facilities and moving them in with them. I haven't done a lot of follow-up to see how that's going now, but it's a big decision. I mean, it's a decision that requires a lot of planning. It can definitely be done, and it can last for a long time, but I think you have to look at the home environment, the accessibility issues. What do you do if somebody needs more care, medical care? I mean, there's kind of that pressure. Well, if you're, family living together, you take care of people. I mean, that's a time-honored tradition, but I think it's possible and it's happening. I think there are younger adults moving in with mom and dad. There's that going on as well.
Absolutely. Um, and the Okay, so now let's talk about Chapter 5, New Frontiers in Senior Housing. And this is always a great subject.
Yes, and Amanda mentioned earlier, so a new development about 4 or 5 years ago, I suppose, was micro apartments. And this was in response in large urban areas like LA, San Francisco, New York, where housing is so unaffordable, and yet many college age people, recent graduates, want and need to work in those areas. And so they just sort of took the dormitory model and created it for young adults. And with varying success, they found that many people over 65 were interested in the same concept. And so the micro apartment could be anywhere from 500 square feet to 1,700 square feet. And we had the honor of interviewing 2 families that sold houses that they had been living in for decades, houses that were more on the scale of 5,000 square feet, and moving into 1,700 square feet. And one family in particular was just such a delight to talk to. They were not just a couple who were retirement age, but they also had the mother-in-law who was in her late 80s or early 90s, also move in, and their 2 dogs into this micro apartment. Their reason for this was because they were living more in the suburbs, and they wanted to return to a city dwelling, and all of that entailed, including being able to easily go to museums and performances and
I'm glad you brought that up because I did notice in chat that my good friend and a very popular author that we've had on here, Joy Laverty, is on this call, and she and I she lives in downtown Chicago, and we were talking about the benefits of living in a city as you grow older. And I think we could do a whole discussion on urban senior living. So maybe we'll bring you back in on that one. The thing that I want people to notice is that we have not talked about one thing yet, one living option that has a sign on the outside of the building that says senior living yet, okay? And this is one thing that I've found is that a lot of times when people start thinking about where am I going to go, and then they do some research, they migrate to, the active adult, the life plan community, what have you, and inevitably they say, I'm not ready yet. And one of the things is we're here on chapter 5, and we haven't brought up yet a traditional senior living community. And so I think that's really important for the I'm not ready yet folks.
Mhm.
Exactly. And that was part of our intention was what are the other options? We really wanted to present what other than senior living. And I don't want to be negative about all senior living or
Oh,
assisted
I
living.
can't because they
Yeah.
are my champions. They are my
Right.
livelihood for the
No, I
last
am
32
not,
years. Yeah.
I know that there are good ones. And, but realistically, there are also ones that don't meet the needs of certain people. So we really did, this book is about exploring what else is there.
Okay. And I want to I want to address a comment that just came in from Geeta, and she says, "I'm probably not on the right call. My parents are resistant about moving. My mother has Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and my dad is a caregiver. How do I make the home safe?" Okay. Number one, Geeta, I am glad that you are here. And I know there are people in the audience that can help. As for example, uh, I see that Ken Silverstein with the Friends Club in Bethesda is in the audience. So, audience members, if you've got some solutions for um, caregivers with difficult challenges, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, what have you, by all means, throw some resources in there. And Geeta, please feel free to email me, and I can connect you with some folks that can be helpful as well, or connect you with some resources so that you can find folks. But thank you for being here. Okay, now let's dive into again another one that we've done a discussion on, and it was fascinating. I'm going to look it up while you guys are talking, and that's living the dream retirement in another country. And I'm going to look up the discussion that we had on that while you share some resources there.
So we really enjoyed writing this chapter because it also gave us the opportunity to talk to people who are actually doing this. And the one thing that I want to say that was kind of new for me is I could picture couples doing this, but I hadn't thought about um, divorced women, single women. We know of a daughter and her aging mother moved to another country together, primarily because of the financial advantages for them at that time. And it led to a lot of positive consequences for the entire family, including grandchildren. Um, so that's a starting point. Is that it's not just one type of family or person who can benefit from moving away.
Yeah, and Ed and Cynthia Staton, the two folks that we interviewed who moved in 2008 to Ecuador during the recession, they just decided to cash out and retire there. And they're actually traveling in Portugal right now because I still get their newsletters, and we interviewed them. They were great. So they help people. Their whole business now is helping people figure out how to move overseas. And so they've worked out all the kinks. What do you do about healthcare? What do you do if you have can you get your Social Security? All of those questions. And at the beginning of the pandemic, their challenge was getting back to the States to see family.
Yep.
of course, now that's all been relaxed, but, it's an idea that a lot of people are considering and doing. Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mexico.
Yeah, and if you're at all interested in this, I dropped in our discussion with Dan Precher, senior editor of International Living,
Mm,
and it was fascinating. I mean, the reason that this expat retirement, I never realized this, but the reason was that in the 70s, there were people who didn't have pensions and that literally they had to live on Social Security, and the only choice was these international destinations. And they've made it so attractive for expats who aren't taking a job away from somebody in that country. So you can still work, digitally in a lot of these settings and take advantage of these benefits. But the interesting thing on housing, I want to bring this up because of this. I said to Dan, if you watch that video, you hear it. I said, well, what about assisted living? Because he lives in Latin America, and I go, well, what about assisted living? He goes, Steve, remember I told you how inexpensive it is to have a full-time housekeeper and a full-time
mhm.
cook. Those individuals are now your caregivers as you grow older, and they expect to do it. And so he said there are some assisted livings in some of these countries, but it's more from the pressure of like the American culture that may have come in there.
Yeah, and there was a comment that was just made, the cost of care is a fraction of what it is in the States. And I'm talking about caregivers coming into the home to take care of somebody, maybe
Oh,
even 24/7. It's actually affordable. Whereas, you really have to be pretty wealthy to be able to afford 24-hour care here. And there's availability of caregivers. Caregivers, I mean, it's a huge problem across the country. There's a lot of turnover. There are staff shortages. So that's the other appeal of living in another country. And just medical care in general is so much less.
yeah. So there's some resources there, and there's consultants, and then I recommend subscribe to this International Living newsletter and magazine. It's just so fun to read those articles. Let's see. Robert Pearson says a family member who knew a quadriplegic who moved to Central America so he could afford 24/7 assistance. Yeah. And the
Yeah.
thing, if you move to a foreign country as a retiree and you've got your cook and your housekeeping staff, you're developing a relationship with these folks so that the people that are caring for you are not unknown. They're not strangers.
And one of those stories that we feature in our chapter, and of course, this isn't going to happen for everybody. I do want to put that out there. Every place changes, but this was a story that happened about 10 years ago. And the this was the older, almost retirement age daughter and her mother who had dementia moved to Costa Rica. And not only were they able to find a person that they could hire to help take care of the mother with dementia in the home, but that person became like a family member to them. And as then the mother passed away and the retired daughter continued to stay there, and she also developed dementia. And this person who worked for them, who cared, truly, I mean, cared about them, she would take this person to family parties, and she became a member of that extended family of the local population. So there's just a different attitude about aging, and segregating aging people doesn't happen in the same way that it does here.
Yep. No, that's This is great. Okay, and yeah, but Robert, great surfing in Costa Rica as well.
Yeah,
So
I saw that.
okay,
Yay!
okay. So let's see. We're chapter 7. What if it doesn't work out? Why every one of us needs a plan B? And you know, I think we talk more about plan B on these discussions than anything.
Well, that's a good thing because we should all start with plan B and then, excuse me, work our way back from there. I mean, Leslie and I talk about this a lot. It's really hard to think about sort of the worst case scenario. I mean, nobody wants to think about that, but really that's kind of what you need to do. You need to think about the worst case scenario, plan for that, and then everything else will fall into place. So that means planning for more care. How will you pay for it? Where will you go? You may not need it, you might, but you have to plan for it.
And we all agree, you don't want that.
You don't want that. You don't want that, and you don't want to think about it, but you really have
But you
to.
better.
You better do it.
Yep. So no, very good. And then let's finish things up in chapter 8 with superagers roll with the punches.
So this kind of ties in with chapter 7 too. We really talk about flexibility in your mindset. The people that we met who we're referring to as superagers, who didn't just change where they lived once after 60, they may have done it 2 or 3 times. And part of the way they were able to do that was that they had a flexible mindset. They didn't say, this is the last place I'm ever going to live. That is a recipe for disaster to say that. Keeping it open, know that you have plan B. If the worst case scenario happens to you, let everybody know. And we also talk about advanced directives. We think of those as including what you want medically, but you can also include, this is what I need in a living space. For example, my mother is 93. She has dementia, but we're very fortunate that her dementia still allows her to recognize her children. But the one thing that she needs in her living environment that she has said ever since I was a little kid, I need sunshine. So if she has a window, and even if she only has one room, she's happy. And that my sister and I make sure every place that we ever looked, where's the sun coming from? We're out there with our app telling us what direction. So it's really key that you communicate in writing, in conversations. You can make a video of, this is what I want where I live.
Yeah, I tell you, these discussions are very therapeutic to me because I've been on all 300 in the last 2 years, and there are several common themes. Communicate with the people around you. It could be your loved ones, your next door neighbor, your paid medical power of attorney, whoever, but you've got to communicate. But the thing that you talked about that I think is even more important is the ability to be flexible, be very careful about what you say and what you take ownership of, because I can't tell you how many conversations I have with adult children whose mom has dementia, and they're like, I promised mom that I would never move her into a home. She told me never move her to a home. And I know a lot of you folks in the audience are probably saying that right now. But just recognize the pressure that puts on you, and the options that are now not available to you because you have put that stake in the sand that says this is how it's got to be, and none of us have a crystal ball. And there's there's a lot of lonely and isolated people who are living alone at home that could be benefiting from some of the things that we've been talking about today.
And I just have to say one thing to the person who made the comment about their parent that has Parkinson's and they can't convince them to move. You know, my parents really needed assisted living. They were living in independent senior living. My dad really needed it. We gently talked about it for weeks, for months. Finally, one day, they, out of the blue, they said, we're ready. We had them moved in 48 hours. I mean, we didn't want to leave any time for change of mind. And it was the best decision all of us have ever made, you know, and they agreed with that. So I just want to put that out there. Sometimes it just takes a lot of time. Sometimes it takes a crisis, and sometimes people just realize that's the best option.
And I want to respond also, Steve, to so many people going through that. Sometimes it's going to be too late. So you've promised your mother that you're never going to move her to a home. And unlike Amanda's parents, who finally came to the conclusion themselves, which of course that's what we want, sometimes that dementia is going to progress to a point where you can't tell mom anymore. And you make the decision. And I really want to make sure people realize, do not feel guilty about that. Get that. You are doing what you can for your parents. You have not betrayed them. You have done what you can, and now you're doing the best you can. That's all any of us can do.
Yep. No, the great points. And let's see. I just glanced and I see that N Marks has their hand up. N Marks, if you did that by accident, no problem. But if you did have a question that you wanted to ask or a statement you wanted to make, you can open up your mic. And once again, some great chat going on. I'm going to make sure to make a copy of this for everybody, along with the recording. And let's see, Lindsay Vajpayee says options and flexibility are so important. I particularly think about families with dementia who have to rethink their living environments due to the changing needs of the person with dementia. And Pam says it's sad how few adult children are willing to have a detailed level of conversation to look at all the triggers and drivers for the different care. And I think that's a really good way to look at it, Pam, is that instead of saying, I will never move to a home, it's sort of having that conversation on, look, I know that you don't want to move to a home, but would dementia where you don't know, where you don't remember me and your grandkids, would that be a trigger that could warrant you moving? Because mom's safety and security is at risk if she's living like that in her own home potentially.
And I want to bring up too, because we did target the audience for this book to be younger and include older adults as well. I've had someone come up to me and say, this book, it's not too long and the chapters are not too long. They gave it to their mother, who was in her 70s, so that they could have a conversation about it. They could use this book, as many others, as a starting point for conversations like, well, what do you think about this chapter? Did you think that was funny? Or do you think you could do that? Or that kind of thing.
Couple of really cool folks that have some really cool things in chat. Jose Ramos, what will you do if by 2030 there are not enough resources, caregivers, doctors, institutional care? What if the only option is to move in with mom? That is definitely a top, something that we should all be concerned about. Absolutely. But again, the home sharing, again, from an affordability, an isolation, it is a solution, that could be out there. And home sharing with a caregiver. There's somebody else, Anthony Nunez of INF Care. I'm going to buy this book for my mom. She needs that flexibility mentality. And Anthony and Jose, I know you're involved with some really innovative projects. Drop in your information into chat so people know what you're up to. This is a really good thing.
Yeah, some great comments coming through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Glenna says, for one thing, stop calling it a home. Uh, uh, that is such a negative image. So many people in today's communities are very nice, and another thing that we talk about on these discussions is the language. Like, number one, it's better to call it a home than a facility, okay? But just that letter makes such a huge difference. It's
Mhm.
it's home, not a home. It's a community, not a facility. So thank you, Glenna, for that one. And let's see. Uh, Okay. Okay. Great. Um, okay. Well, we're almost to the top of the hour. I knew this was going to be a great discussion, and but I am actually really excited to have the two of you back for. We're going to do the same thing, but with your book, a guide to hiring and managing caregivers at home. So I'm going to send you an email this afternoon with the recording, and we will try to get that on the calendar so everybody in the audience can jump in on that. Oh, let's see. Jeannie W has her hand raised. Jeannie, do you have if you didn't, if you raised your hand, yeah, Jeannie, did you have a question? Jeannie? Your mic's open. Okay. Oh, it was a mistake. Okay, that's okay.
Oh, and somebody just asked where they can buy the book. They can buy it on Amazon.
Okay, yeah. I'll put the link in on the recording so that you can get it. But if you just go to Amazon and type in "Choose Your Place: Rethinking Your Home as You Age," and all right, folks, this was great. Amanda, Leslie, thank you so much. Our audience, once again, you really are the star of the show. I love the feedback that you all give and the questions and insight. It just makes these discussions so much fun. And we'll look forward to seeing the two of you again shortly to talk about hiring home care workers.
Thank you
Great.
so much,
Thank
Steve.
you. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everybody.
All right.